everyone. So for my last project, I made Butterick B6354, which is a pattern by Gertie. The fabric I chose for this specific project was a lovely rayon fabric I got in Berkeley. And it was really awesome to work with. It flowed beautifully. But for this piece, I decided to make it reversible. So I really wanted to focus on making sure that the two fabrics that I used for this reverse were of the similar weight. The bolero on this particular pattern was actually pretty simple. It was only a couple pattern pieces. So I actually already want to sew up a bunch more of these just for, different outfits and stuff. So I also decided as I was working on this, just because it was going to be reversible, that I wouldn't be doing any top stitching and instead did a lot of stitching by hand just to kind of give it a real, handmade touch and purposefully make that obvious. The sleeves are actually probably the trickiest part about the bolero, just because I catch stitched them just to make sure that it was a little bit flexible as I wore it. The bustier of this particular piece was actually 3 layers for me. The pattern only really calls for the 1 plus the boning layer, but for me, because I didn't need to make it reversible, I ended up using Ridgeline boning and then putting that onto a silk layer between, it's like a sandwich. There was actually a lot of basting to keep all of this in place, a lot of pinning, just because I was working with so many layers that were a little bit flimsy, and then having to make sure that everything was properly set. To be quite honest, the instructions did call for interfacing part of the bodice pieces, and I would not recommend that for future wear. It actually made that piece way too stiff, even though I did use my thinnest and most flexible interfacing. You can kind of see here that the piece that was interfaced was pretty stiff, and unfortunately kind of clashed a little bit with the bodice itself, just because the bodice does look a little bit more fluid, and the bias detailing was just too different, and it didn't lay as comfortably as it should have. Also, another thing that I changed, because I did make my piece reversible, was making sure that the bias detailing was not encased in the side seams as the directions called for, because I did need it to be able to flip back and forth over the bodice. You can kind of see in this shot, me turning it inside out. And unfortunately, I did have to kind of overlook a lot of the traditional stay stitching to kind of get the top to sit traditionally. I ended up hand stitching it both at the top closure and at the bottom closure, just to make sure that the two pieces sit comfortably against each other. For the straps, definitely made sure to put a little bit of interfacing where I was going to be placing the buttonholes. My machine right now does not have a buttonhole foot, so I did have to kind of rough it up with a little bit of crazy zigzagging to make sure that it fit properly. Straps are always really difficult for me to turn, actually, even though I do have a strap turner. Never seems to work out so well for me. Because my piece is reversible, I actually put buttons underneath the bias detailing and hid that on both sides. To finish up the bodice, the part that made it easier for me to make this reversible was that I did use buttons down the back, so that kind of took away from having to have a zipper. And the skirt itself was actually pretty quick to sew. I finished that up super easily. I think the trickiest part for me was just, trying to avoid any distortions that would happen because of the fabric that I was using, and making sure that it would look great on both sides, and that I would be working with both the negative space on both sides. The one thing that I would really recommend about this skirt, though, just in general, is that even though it's a sarong that should generally stay closed, I did have to use a safety pin when I wore it, just because I could not put a snap closure or anything like that at the overlap when you tie it around your waist. So if you're not making this reversible, it's no problem. It's actually probably better that way. And you can kind of put a clasp there where it overlaps, where I just folded it, just so that it won't slip down in the middle when you're wearing it. Again, here I'm kind of just making sure that I can fold up the hem, and then later on I do hand finish that edge, just because at this point there's been a little bit of stretching in the fabrics. So this project was actually part of a collaboration with a few other seamstresses in the retro blogging world, including Christina from Gussets and Got It, and Abby from The Crafty Pinup, as well as Akram from Akram's Ideas. Definitely check out the links below to see their posts about these projects, and check out my blog for some more pictures. If you like the video, please subscribe, give it a thumbs up, and looking forward to hearing your feedback.